So thank you, everyone. We are very excited to have you today in this webinar with our CEO, Antti Vihavainen, and with Team Preisenhammer from Carbo Culture. We are talking today about how to secure carbon removal for your net zero pledge. So we're going to learn how to pre-order future corks and enable suppliers to scale their carbon removal operations. I would then give the word to our CEO, Antti Vihavainen, who will talk on how the pre-CORC takeoff agreements work. Thank you, Antti.
Thank you, Elba, and nice to see everybody over here. It's a lot of familiar names and a lot of new names as well, so delighted about that. This is a first of hopefully a series of sessions where we are introducing a particular supplier of negative emissions, and today, of course, we are delighted to have Carbo Culture here with us. But before that, let's just go through some of the sort of the basic information that is relevant for the discussion later. So I'm not going to spend too much time on what is Puro, because I hope that many of you already know something about us, and if you don't, I would encourage you to spend some time on the website or take a look at some of the earlier webinars where we spent more time on this. But just very quickly, we are a standard for engineered carbon removal. We run a registry where the integrity and the life cycle of these certificates is managed. We also act as an innovation platform. We run a marketplace for businesses to interact and basically purchase and sell these certificates. And we are also building something we call the supplier funding solutions, which is basically what this session is also all about. Very quickly, we have a few really good reference customers that we would like to highlight here. Microsoft, of course, along with Swiss Re, very prominent proponents of carbon removal. Shopify, all the other ones are also high-profile companies that want to make sure that carbon removals will grow in the future. But before we go to what is the pre-CORC, let's look at the CORC itself. So CO2 removal certificate, or a CORC. That's our trademark and our sort of intellectual property. And it starts with the realization that we wanted to make a very solid and find the least disputable ways of sequestering carbon dioxide. So we require the processes to quantify the emissions associated with that process, and then deduct all the sequestered or embodied carbon from that. And if that equation turns out to be negative, then we can decouple that net negative part from the process and turn that into the CORC, the CO2 removal certificate, which each one of them represents 1 ton of CO2 removed from the circulation. And it's good to observe that only the net negative part is credited. The possible, let's say, avoided emissions can be listed as co-benefits, but they are not credited. And if the physical product is sold separately, then it is forbidden to market that as a carbon sink or carbon net negative product in order to avoid double sales. All of this is, of course, third-party verified, has been right from the beginning, and we work with several high-quality auditors in that sense. At the moment we have 5 methodologies in our framework. Biochar is, of course, in focus today. There are others. Very permanent way of sequestering carbon dioxide is to turn that into carbonate building elements. Wooden building elements is also very interesting. Geologically stored carbon, any atmospheric or biogenic CO2 that can be injected into a geologic cavity qualifies there. And soil amendments is a pilot pilot methodology at the moment. Plenty of new ones coming along in the next few months and years. So now to the actual subject matter. So what is pre-CORC? It basically denotes the future issuance of corks. It's a structured approach to long-term offtake agreements to help suppliers move forward. And by moving forward, we mean that the assumption is that if you've got offtake agreements, then it is easier to raise equity. And if you've got offtake agreements and equity, then it's easier to raise debt. And then you can move to the execution phase. So the one that makes these pre-CORC commitments is actually the enabler of a birth of a new industry. And before that can happen, we of course check the eligibility and we enable the listing on the pre-CORC site. And the supplier can choose which conditionalities apply. For example, they may say yes or no to a minimum committed quantity. So they may say that we need to have at least 50 or 60 or 70% of our total quantity or total volume pre-committed before they can move on. They may say that funding is required. They may say that permissions are still pending, and therefore it makes this whole agreement conditional. So in effect, this pre-CORC is a bilateral agreement between the buyer and the future supplier that takes into account the uncertainties of the early phases of the project. And furthermore, the way it's shown on our website is that you'll go to our website and click on Shop Online and select pre-CORCs. And then you can basically see what is available there. At the moment, we have 16 projects and a little bit more than 400,000 tons of supply. And from there, you'll see what is available. And today we are going to speak about Carbo Culture and their alpha facility. And I will let, of course, Tim talk much more about that. However, before that, I would like to note that we've got the person that Elba alluded to is Arnaud de France, who is sitting here beside me, and he is the man in charge of our supplier funding solutions. So all these three phases. If you've got questions, if you want to become a supplier, or if you want to purchase, or commit to buying pre-CORCs, then reach out to Arno or go to the website over there.
Yes, hi everyone, and I want to add to that that not only if you are supplier of future carbon removal or buyers, but also potential investors or climate lender, please reach out. Any enabler is welcome to try to help us solve this growth dilemma. Nice to meet you all.
All right. Thank you very much, Arno. I would like to hand over to Tim.
Very good. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Are we good? Can everyone see it? Just a quick yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Antti. Before I start, I want to take a moment to thank Antti, Elba, and the entire Puro team. Puro has been the first to develop a firm verification system for biochar removal certificates, and we're really, as an industry, extremely grateful for this. So thank you. With that, let's dive in a little bit. So apologies if my team name says something different. I am indeed Tim, head of commercialization at Carbo Culture, which means that I make sure that this company makes money. And this whole presentation shouldn't take more than 10 minutes, and I'm really eager to get into your questions after. But basically, what I want you to take away from this is three things. The first is to get an understanding of our approach to carbon removal, to understand that we build carbon removal technology to a scale where it really matters to climate change, And thirdly, that you can get involved by pre-purchasing our pre-CORCs from our forthcoming facility through the Puro platform. And I'll walk you through that in a second. A little bit of background on us. We were founded back in 2017 by the Finnish entrepreneur Henrietta Moon and by the Californian carbon removal guru Christopher Carstens. The two actually met at a NASA program that was aimed at solving some of the world's trickiest problems. And Chris came in there and had been a focused idea on like carbon removal from the atmosphere, and actually had a specific technology in mind. Meanwhile, Henrietta brought years of experience in leading a company, so they matched up and founded Carbo Culture together. At the same time, something interesting happened, which is that carbon removal really entered the international stage and the international discourse. Basically, what happened was that scientists realized that we cannot keep our climate goals with renewables and decarbonization alone. So we need to actively draw down carbon from the atmosphere. And then came firms like yours that picked up on this idea, and companies making net zero commitments suddenly started popping up everywhere and actually became key drivers to scaling our industry and this new sector of carbon removal. So let's talk about how our approach to carbon removal works. We start with the planet's most essential system, and you can see that here on the left, the carbon cycle. Plants naturally draw down carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. That is just how they grow. The fundamental issue, however, is that once the plants die, they re-release the carbon back into the atmosphere. This makes planting trees only a short-term solution. And it is exactly where our work starts. So we have developed and are still developing also a scalable technology to keep the carbon on Earth for 1,000+ years. The machines we build use a mixture of pressure and heat to transform the biomass into a stable carbon. And it comes in the form of little pebbles that I brought for you today. So I'll show that real quick in my camera, called biochar. At our demonstration reactor in California, we create ultra high quality biochar that is then safely stored in soils. This process results in the creation of carbon removal certificates, because what we're fundamentally doing here is by creating biochar, is taking carbon that was in the atmosphere and storing it in the soil for a really long time. A byproduct that you can see here is that we produce heat that we're planning to give to district heating plants. So, here we go. People have made biochar for a really long time. So what's really different about us? It's actually really simple. We are building this technology to scale. Thus far, much of the biochar production has been smaller operations where local farmers wanted to convert some of their feedstock into biochar. This technology was never meant to be a climate change fighting technology. We're changing that. We're building simply bigger machines, and we're producing the biochar really to a quality that is safe to store in the soils. Here's a little more, I figured it out. Here's a little more on our path and where we currently are and where we're going. So we already have a facility in California and actually sold out of all carbon removal certificates there. This facility is meant for R&D. That's where we learn how to control the reaction from biomass to biochar in such a way that we can build it bigger. We're also currently building a second R&D facility in California, our expanded capacity reactor. The idea here is that we need to test more about the conversion and how it behaves when we simply make the diameter of the reactor much, much larger. It's already ordered actually, and it's getting built as we're speaking. And we're looking to get it into operation next year. This facility, however, will not create a meaningful amount of credits because it's still meant for experiments. So you can see how we're building towards that scale right now. The step that is important for you is our alpha facility. Alpha will have a capacity of 14,000 tons and will be specifically built to fight climate change. And from there, we can expand the Alpha type of facility and rapidly deploy at a global scale. So you don't just see boxes here. Here's actually a rendering of our Alpha facility. It will be operational in 2024, and you can already buy the pre-corks for it on our Puro platform or on our website on Puro. And I'm super, super excited about this new facility. Alpha is really the first step for biochar to enter the center stage of climate technology. It will have 3 times the carbon drawdown capacity of the largest air capture plant currently in existence, and it will feature technology that is really optimized to fight climate change. Therefore, once we've built Alpha, we'll be able to roll out this new generation of facilities at a global scale. So why should you really get involved with this today? It really is 2 simple reasons. We are pioneers, and so are our customers. Our carbon removal credits are not made for firms who just want to tick a box. This is made for companies who want to be on the forefront of innovation and help us build the entire carbon removal space to a scale where it ultimately matters to climate change. The second reason is related to demand. Even at 14,000 tons, the capacity in the new generation carbon removal space is extremely limited. And we already have a lot of interest in these credits today. So we encourage you to secure them as early as possible. How can you buy this? I'll show you again what Antti already mentioned. Exiting out of this presentation. You can go on the Puro.earth website, click Shop Online and PreQuarks, and you can find us here currently as the first project, and go through the website to purchase. Naturally, I imagine there could be a lot more questions before you actually decide to purchase. And I would encourage you to get directly in touch with me at tim@carboculture.com, or of course, with the Puro team. Thank you. That's my presentation. Let's take some questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Antti. So yeah, there are some questions already in the chat. For example, Toby Bryce would like to know how how can you claim 1,000-year permanence, given the general questions on permanence about of biochar in the marketplace?
Yeah, good question. So permanence is one of the main reasons, first of all, taking one step back and then answering your question. Permanence is one of the main reasons why biochar is interesting in the first place. Because trees, just planting trees is a short-term solution. Biochar is meant to be introducing permanence to a nature-based solution. If you take biomass, you convert it into biochar, it just becomes much more permanent in this pebble form. How do we actually measure it? It's called the OC ratio, which is a chemical way of measuring the half-life that this biochar will survive for. So we have lab results that I think Puro also checked for us. Antti says yes, that really guarantees that permanence.
Great, thank you so much, Tim. You were not sure if that's pronounced right. Hieman would like to know, where is the plant to be built in Europe?
Yep. So we are finalizing our plans right now, plans for the plant for Northern Europe. Currently, we are in final conversations in Finland. Excellent.
Philip would like to know, are you able to talk about the range of material inputs?
Yes. So I'll start with currently and then talk about Alpha. Currently, we are in the Central Valley of California. So that means we use ultra-local feedstocks from there. That means walnut shells, peach pits, olive pits that are just available in our immediate region. And it's actually amazing driving through the Central Valley. You see these piles and piles of feedstock that is just lying around, rotting and going back into the atmosphere. For alpha, we are going to look at a local industry as well around Finland. That would probably be waste products from the local wood industry or byproducts.
Excellent. Also, Henrik would like to know, how is the price of the pre-corks decided?
Yeah, so the price of the pre-cork for us includes two things. The first one is just the operational expenses of simply running an operation. But the second part I want to call the innovation premium. The idea here is that, as mentioned, we are building a first of its kind reactor. Something of this scale has not been built yet. So we need to pay in our first facility for all of the CapEx necessary. That means like a custom reactor that is really built for us and for our needs, really optimized for climate change, and all the innovation that goes into it is part of that innovation premium. The last part is one thing that's also innovative about us is that we don't want to charge farmers too much for sequestering our carbon. So many folks make a lot of money of selling biochar to farmers. We actually radically reduce the price to make sure that the carbon sink and the service that farmers provide by storing our biochar in their soil is also scalable.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. And what are the plans for the sale of the actual biochar from the Alpha facility? Roussel wants to know, will it be sold also on a prospective long-term offtake basis?
Yes, and we already have agreements or letters of intent with partners to take off the biochar, which they see actually as a market that is growing, and they are experts at making sure that the biochar is safely stored in soils. Ooh, a lot of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, it seemed to be a lot of questions. We have someone.
Yeah, there's Mike that has
Mike,
raised.
yeah. Let me see if Mike, can you unmute?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
You mentioned the process has a pressure at the moment. Can you indicate what sort of pressure the reactor is working under?
Yeah, so that is part actually of our IP, but I can explain the general principle, which is that pressure is coming from top and we have really high heat from the bottom. And overall, that leads to an ultra high temperature conversion to biochar, which is really how we ensure the quality of our material.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Can you please elaborate how you ensure that the biochar is supplied in a way that CO2 is stored? So I guess that it remains in the soil.
Absolutely. Yeah, so as Alba already started explaining, essentially the idea is when you put biochar in soil, then it is generally considered safely stored. So that is our key priority, that we make sure that it gets sold to people who then put it in the soil. And that is exactly what we're doing right now. All of our partners are related to applications in the soil. So one of them, for instance, puts it in cattle feed, and then through the cow, it goes eventually into the field.
Okay, and what about the emissions from the reactor process?
Mm-hmm. That's where I think I can pass it off to Antti actually, because in your auditing, in Puro's auditing, you account for any emissions that we have throughout the process.
And I must say that the right person to really give a thorough answer to that would be Marianne on our side, but on a high level, that is exactly correct. So we have requirements in the methodology for the emissions, and one of the key, essential requirements is that there should not be any venting of the pyrolysis gases. They should be recirculated back into the system, back into the process, which helps raise the temperature and therefore also quality of the biochar. So this is basically a requirement on our side, and the supplier is supposed to, provide evidence that this indeed is the case for the auditors.
Yeah, and I guess that brings us to another question about the thermal energy from the process, if you will also use that.
Yes, absolutely. So thermal energy essentially is we'll be using as heat. First, it's a gas, a syngas that comes out of the process that can then be converted to clean heat, essentially. We are looking to co-locate with a district heating plant, so they can take off our heat from us and actually serve the local communities with it.
Excellent. And there's a really interesting question about, given how early this industry space is, can you talk about fundraising as it relates to the relationship with Puro.earth?
Yeah. Maybe you could elaborate on that question, what you mean by that. But essentially, I want to start with today. Like, what's the point of you buying pre-CORCs? Is, as Antti mentioned, the idea that if we have commitments for the pre-CORCs today, we can turn around and take that to our investors to say, look, this is really an emerging space. All of these customers are looking to buy this. Help us with the fundraising, or invest in us and invest in our facility. And I think there was an elaboration on this question, Alba, if you could find it for me.
Philip was the one. Philip could also unmute if he wanted to.
But maybe you could just mention, Tim, that you've actually raised funding, if that's what you've done correctly.
Yeah, correct. So we have, we're one of the few venture-backed firms in this space right now, which enables us to grow very fast. We raised a $6.2 million round with both an American and a Berlin-based investor back in April, I think it was.
Hi, Philip. Yes, go ahead with your question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. I think you pretty much covered the question, but it is quite remarkable, the space which we're all working in at the moment, and those traditional challenges that investment firms may have had in the past are quite unique. And so I think the work that Puro.earth are doing is underpinning a lot of the innovation that's beginning to pour into this space is crucial. And so what I find interesting is your comment about the fact that there is an investor space that is mature enough in their internal processes to be able to understand what it means to actually have future contractual obligations to what is essentially, an R&D project as you're beginning to go up that scaling curve. Fascinating space.
Thank you. Yes, it certainly is. And I think the idea is just generally that we are only like one facility removed from really getting towards that scale, and people do want to sponsor that innovation, right? It's not like we're miles away. We still need to roll it out globally, which then becomes a new challenge. But the fundamental question right now is, can we build bigger machines? And that is essentially what the investors want to get in on.
Do you see direct air capture as being a competitor for you?
I think US customers decide between biochar, direct air capture, and most of the times you choose both. When you build your portfolios, you build them together. So we actually think that this space needs to grow with all the technologies right now available. So we're actually really supportive of direct air capture and find it also a fascinating space.
And I would like to also clarify to Philip and everyone that is listening, Carbo Culture is our current supplier. So with their California facility, they have already gotten support in the sense that they have already gotten customers for their corks. So they have in a way validated their concept through Puro.earth, through selling corks to us. And there's someone else, Kevin. did you want to ask something to Tim?
There's also Rob who has raised a hand some time ago.
Please go ahead then.
If you're waiting for Rob to respond, Rob had his question answered about the use of thermal energy. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rob.
Well, Mike and Rob, you have the hands up. If you can lower them, so it's easier to pick the next ones then. There's another question coming in. Sandhya is saying, how do you know what the characteristics of your biochar will be if you don't have your input set yet?
Yeah, it's a good question. That is why we're doing a bunch of testing right now in California. So the reason why we have such limited supply in California is because most of the time when we run our reactors, we actually don't go to Puro and claim credits for that because we're experimenting with all kinds of different feedstocks. We're literally trying to find out like what is in this after our conversion. So we are currently experimenting with stuff as far as hemp, bamboo, different pits from different waste processes, wood, different pellets, just to see for global rollout, all of that needs to eventually work in our process. So that is what we're experimenting with, and we're constantly testing the material to make sure that we have a safe quality that can be ultimately stored in soils.
Great. Russell has another question also. Since the pre-CORC is a bilateral agreement, is the idea that once it is signed, Carbo Culture and the buyer would then proceed to do further due diligence one-on-one towards a final agreement?
We could actually let Arnaud answer this question.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a very good question. As an intermediary, it's always interesting to kind of calibrate how much you want to control a bit of those bilateral kind of discussion. The idea of Puro is just to enable them. So we provide with a tool and kind of a concrete, commitment tool to unlock those discussions. Obviously, buyers have different criteria to make their decisions and different due diligence process, and we don't want to interfere too much with the differences. But we do have a role to play in having an enabling tool for everyone to have those discussions. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think very well.
Yeah, and to add from our perspective, right, we want to make sure that if you become a customer of ours, you really become part of our mission to scale this technology. So we don't want you to just, tick a box somewhere, make an agreement, and then we walk away from each other and see each other again in 2024 when our facility's up. We want you to be very much part of our growth story. We want you to see our facilities, to see our progress, and to join us in the story. This is the fundamental idea of our customers that also really help us tell the story of growth and scale.
Excellent. So a last question from Philip. What happens to the pre-CORC if something unforeseen happens until the final plant operation? For example, lower performance, no installation, or alike?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question and something that needs to be tackled first of all in the conditionalities. So the agreement recognizes that there are uncertainties, and although we want to make sure that the pre-CORC commitment is as bankable a document as possible, once those uncertainties or conditionalities have been removed, it is a legally binding document. However, we always actually require that the supplier never commits to sell all of its sort of plant maximum capacity. So there's always a significant buffer. It's typically 25%. So the maximum sort of available committed quantity is 75% of the the plant capacity. We are also working on a sort of a further insurance kind of a scheme with which these underperformance or under delivery situations could be helped out, but that's further down the line.
Yeah, and I think to add, like, the three parties like Puro, us, and maybe you should just sit down and talk about what risks you are willing to underwrite and what not. The first step, though, is to show the general excitement about it, to start negotiating about it, and to get on board with this general mission. That is the first critical step, and I think there is some flexibility around just managing risks, which we fully acknowledge need to be managed.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Antti, and thank you to everyone who came today. This recording will be available and will be sent to everyone who registered as well. And we will also amplify this in social media. So please share the story of these suppliers who are trying to scale carbon removal. We really need everyone to get on board with this. Thank you so much.